Thank you, Lou. Thank you, everyone above me, behind me. Jeff said this would be very casual and informal, and actually I find it kind of intimidating, actually, to be surrounded. But I am going to talk about Murray, but that's going to come a little later. I think that given the conditions here in Auburn, I think there's someone that we really need to honor as someone who's critical to the Mises Institute. A guy named Willis Haviland Carrier. No, he wasn't an Austrian economist, but he's recognized as the father of air conditioning. Carrier didn't invent the very first system to cool an interior structure. However, his system was the first truly successful and safe one and started a science of modern air conditioning. He and 6 engineers started Carrier Engineering Corp. in 1915 with only $35,000. That's not very much today. The equivalent today would be $650,000. But last year, Carrier sales topped $12.5 billion, and the company employs 45,000 employees. Now, cooling for human comfort rather than just industrial need began actually in 1924, which is not all that long ago. They installed it in the J.L. Hudson department store in Detroit. And strangely enough, people flocked into the store just to enjoy the air conditioning. They then started putting air conditioning in movie theaters, restaurants, theaters, and shopping malls. And then it was very quickly began in 1928 putting air conditioners in residential units. Now, William Carrier made a huge difference in people's lives, people that have never really heard of him. And can you imagine having the Mises University in August in Auburn without air conditioning? Would millions of people be moving to Phoenix or Las Vegas if there was no air conditioning? But that's what great entrepreneurs do. They make people's lives better, and most of the time they receive little or no credit for it. In fact, the public's image of entrepreneurs and businessmen as conniving, miserly, greedy crooks has been shaped since the time of Charles Dickens' Ebenezer Scrooge to the modern-day Michael Douglas character of Gordon Gekko in the movie Wall Street. This image essentially puts a face on Marxist class struggle theory. According to the theory, the primary form of exploitation is economic. The ruling class expropriates part of the productive output of the exploited, or as Marxists say, it appropriates a social surplus product and uses it for its own consumptive purposes. Of course, this negative stereotype of businessmen is as false as Marxist theory itself. While millions continue to struggle and have struggled under Marxist and socialist economic regimes, entrepreneurs are at work in the capitalist world investing capital, organizing resources, and developing new products and creating jobs to make the world a better place. Mises wrote in Human Action, "The vehicle of economic progress is the accumulation of additional capital goods by means of saving and improvement in technological methods of production, the execution of which is almost always conditioned by the availability of new capital. The agents of progress are the promoting entrepreneurs intent upon profiting by means of adjusting the conduct of affairs to the best possible satisfaction of customers. In the performance of their projects for the realization of progress, they are bound to share the benefits derived from progress with the workers and also with the part of the capitalists and landowners, and to increase the portion allocated to those people step by step until their own share melts away entirely," unquote. Now, a guy you haven't heard of is probably a guy named Ron Yankie. He was an entrepreneur who touched thousands of lives, died a couple years ago up in Boise, Idaho. Yankie grew up working in his father's machine shop and took over the business when his father died. The Yankie machine shop's now in its 64th year in business, serving contractors, mining companies, and the forestry industry. Speaking at Yankie's funeral services, his friend Tom Nicholson mentioned that there are a number of people that have worked for the machine shop for over 50 years. Yankie would do anything for an employee, and in turn, the employees would walk through fire for him. The machine shop business was just the beginning for Yankie. He owned 2 sawmills in Montana, Charter Air Service Company, a company that manufactures firefighting equipment. He was a rancher. He owned vast amounts of timberland in western United States. He developed a number of real estate projects, held significant ownership in a mechanical contracting firm and manufactured housing firm and 2 banks. But Yankie is best known as being one of the 3 original investors in a little company called Micron Technology, second largest memory chip manufacturer in the world, and the largest private sector employer in Idaho. Yankie, along with Nicholson and a friend, Alan Noble, funded brothers Ward and Joe Parkinson when they started Micron in 1978 in the basement of a dentist's office. From those humble beginnings, Micron's now traded on the New York Stock Exchange. It has $8 billion in assets, $5.8 billion in shareholder equity, and employs 19,000 employees worldwide. Reverend James Wilson said at the Yankie funeral that there was not a mean bone in Ron Yankie's body. He described him as a gentleman in the true sense of the word, a gentle man. But Ron Yankie was, believe me, the hardest worker anybody had ever seen and the hardest player anybody had seen, as I can attest when I went to a little snowmobile trip with Ron. Nicholson, his friend, amplified the point, telling the crowd that he had one speed for work and play, pedal to the metal. Now, Ron Yankie was a man of considerable wealth, but his tastes were not very expensive at all. He's a big supporter of the Boise State football team, and he would allow the coaches to use the airplane on their recruiting trips. However, when he would come down to Las Vegas for bank board meetings, he, his son-in-law, and his friend Tom Nicholson would fly Southwest Airlines. And after lunch, or after the board meeting, we'd all have lunch at the Soup and Salad Bar at a local casino. He also was interested in any free drink tickets any of us had for Southwest. Now, Boise media did not mention Ron Yankie's investment in a community bank in southern Nevada after he died, because in relation to Micron and some of his other businesses, the bank was really too small to merit any attention. But just in the case of Micron, there wouldn't be a Silver State Bank if it wasn't for Ron. Yankie and Nicholson invested $5 million to start the bank 10 years ago. Today the bank has $1 billion in assets, employs 190 people, and that $5 million investment is now worth $100 million. Now, I'm one of those 190 employees. In fact, I think I was employee number 11, I believe. But I thank my lucky stars for Ron Yankie and his friend Tom Nicholson for the opportunities that they created for me. And if it was not for people like Ron Yankie, the world would be not only a poorer place, but an emptier place. Ron Yankie was a big man. He was larger than life personality. It's been said that he never had a bad day, and you should believe it. The only other person I've been around who was as constantly cheerful as Ron Yankie was a person very near and dear to my heart, Murray Rothbard. Of course, everybody in this room knows who Murray Rothbard is, and a few of us know him personally, and I'm proud to say that I'm one of those people. I moved to Las Vegas in 1986, and I got the bright idea to pursue a master's in economics at UNLV. Why economics, you might ask? Well, I minored in the subject during undergrad, and I kind of liked it. But at the time, MBA degrees were all the rage, and they probably still are. I was advised that an MBA degree would be much better for my career, but I decided on economics anyway. And by the fall of 1990, I had 12 hours of master's credit under my belt, and I was desperately running out of options in terms of trying to avoid econometrics and statistics. So I was looking through the catalog, the UNLV course catalog, and I saw an entry, History of Economic Thought, Rothbard. Perfect. I mentioned this to one of my classmates that I'd be taking the course under Rothbard, and he said, no, you shouldn't do that at all. The guy's a kook, don't want to think about it. He said I should go take the course independent study with another instructor. Now, I didn't know who Murray was. I didn't know whether he was a kook or not. I didn't know what Austrian Economics was. I hadn't heard of the term libertarian. But I worked all day at the bank, and I was taking classes at night, and frankly, I didn't have time to go screwing around lining up an instructor for independent study, so I went ahead and took Rothbard. Well, the first night of class, Murray hit the door and he started talking immediately, like he had started his lecture out in the hallway somewhere. And it was something about dumb politicians threatening the evil oil companies that were raising gas prices. Some things never change, I guess. That was during the first Gulf War, I believe. And from that thought, he just continued right into the History of Economic Thought lecture. He didn't take roll. He didn't hand out a syllabus. He didn't have time for any of that. He had centuries to cover. So the 8 or 10 of us in class furiously took notes to keep up. And I didn't know it at the time, but only about half of us were taking it for credit. The other half had already taken the course, and they were just auditing, because Murray changed his History of Economics class every semester, focusing on a different aspect of economic history. And in the fall of 1990, the course had a financial history emphasis. And in fact, if you want to read essentially the notes from Murray's History of Economics class, pick up his History of Economics from an Austrian Perspective book. As Murray launched into this lecture, I knew that this was economics the way it should be taught. Forget the graphs, the equations, the other nonsense that I endured for previous 2 semesters. This was good guys versus bad guys, human action stories, told at a pace of a Robin Williams monologue. And occasionally would, punctuate it with an occasional cackle and a dozen or so reading references a night. He'd give you the book title, the author, the year published, the publisher name. It was really quite extraordinary. So I went ahead and took Murray for U.S. economic history the following semester, but I didn't really know Murray at all. And to illustrate that point, someone asked me last night, the first book that I ever read by Murray. And I said, well, it's America's Great Depression. And really, why? And I said, well, I decided to write a paper on America's Great Depression. And I went into Murray to see if he was okay with the topic. He said, yeah, that's great. I said, do you have any suggestions for sources? He says, well, I wrote a book about that. You might want to take a look at it. I said, is it in the library? He goes, yeah. That's a little tip for your students. If your instructor has written a book on your subject, you should probably consult it and quote it liberally. Yes, probably the way to do that. But anyway, the only time we spoke actually was one night when there was a bomb scare at Beam Hall over at UNLV, and so I couldn't get in the classroom. So I went over to the student union, and I saw Murray sitting with one of my classmates. And I walked up and I said, what's going on? And Murray said, oh, there's a bomb scare. And I said, well, we should send some of the underclassmen in there to find it. He goes, I like the way you think, Douglas. and that was essentially my first kind of conversation with Murray. But I was getting close at this point to, I needed to make a decision whether to take a comprehensive test to get a master's or write a thesis. And I was actually leaning toward taking the test, but thankfully somebody convinced me to write a thesis. But I still didn't know Murray well enough actually to pursue him as my thesis coordinator or chairman, if you will. So I asked somebody else, and in another huge break, that instructor turned me down. So I went to Murray and reintroduced myself to him, and asked him if he'd be my advisor, and I proposed a subject, and Murray welcomed me with open arms. And then he proceeded to rattle off about 20 sources on speculative bubbles to, just get me going. And away we went. Something else I was very lucky about there at UNLV, they used to have something called the theory policy track. And it was really geared for students who wanted to come and study under Murray and Hans Hoppe. And I think I was the last, or I believe that I am, the last student who was able to graduate via that theory policy program. Subsequent to that, the economics department graduate coordinators and others managed to dump that program to actually keep people from coming to UNLV to study under Murray and Hans. But it's really, I really got to know Murray during the researching and writing of my thesis. Spent a lot of time with him. But I really didn't realize his greatness. To me, he was just a good guy. He called me the efficient banker because I was fairly adept at getting approval forms signed and getting things copied and things like that. Probably because I wasn't his smartest student, so he had to call me something. But anyway, but over time I realized how brilliant he was. And as a banker, I meet a lot of people. I have a lot of people who are trying to convince me that they're brilliant, whether they be other bankers, customers, regulators. They all think they're brilliant, and they want to convince you that, especially regulators. And talk to anybody who's made millions of dollars in real estate investment. They're all real smart. Just ask them. But Murray was actually a guy who did know everything, but he didn't act like it. He was never pompous. He never talked down to me or anybody else that I knew of. When I asked him a question, he'd start with an answer, well, in my opinion or in my view. He didn't act like he had all the answers, but he did. And as for his professional stature, I really didn't have a sense of it until I attended a Mises seminar in Stanford. And when I told some people at the table, I didn't know anybody there other than Murray. I told them I was from Vegas, and they said, well, do you know Murray Rothbard? I said, yeah, I'm actually a student of his. And then these people proceeded to beg me for my class notes. And I guess it was at that point it kind of hit me that this guy was something special. Of course, Murray was a walking bibliography. Every time I would meet with him on my thesis, he had more sources. Just title, author, publisher, year published. I can't imagine a better weapon as far as having a thesis advisor. But actually, Murray's best advice concerned my writing. His initial draft, my initial drafts of my thesis were very wordy. I had these long, complicated sentences, and Murray told me, if you want to learn how to write well, just read H.L. Mencken. And that started my, love affair with Mencken. And I would urge anyone who's struggling with their writing to do the same. Now, as great as I thought Murray was, the department chair, Dr. Thayer, didn't give Murray high marks in his 1991 annual evaluation. And although the chairman, by the way, his claim to fame, I think, was a professional paper on the various potency of sunscreen and how that would affect. That was his contribution to economic literature, Dr. Thayer. Anyway, he criticized Murray for having only, quote, only limited contact with most economic students, unquote. Incredibly, in the area of scholarly research or creative activity, Thayer wrote, Professor Rothbard's performance in the area of professional growth has been disappointing. Thayer also wrote that Murray was disappointed in the area of service. Thayer gave Murray an overall satisfactory rating, but he concluded his evaluation with, quote, also we expect Professor Rothbard to participate in departmental affairs, to teach more students, to be available as a role model for junior faculty, unquote. Now you can imagine, Murray blasted Thayer with this 3,000-word comment, he called it, calling Chairman Thayer's evaluation an outrage. Murray pointed out 11 of his scholarly accomplishments in 1991 that for some reason Thayer had overlooked. And commenting on Thayer's rating him disappointing for service, Murray wrote, in the economics department, I have attended and participated in all department meetings, and I have not refused appointment to any department committees. I don't know what Chairman Thayer means by seldom participating in the daily life of the department, teaching courses, advising students, keeping office hours, attending department meetings. What other daily life am I supposed to be missing? The only clue in Chairman Thayer's remarks is that I am supposed to be available as a role model for junior faculty. Apart from wondering why Mr. Thayer should possibly want someone of limited professional growth to serve as a role model, I must say that the best way someone, including myself, can so serve is to be allowed to go about his business as a scholar and teacher without being subject to harassment. Along with Chairman Thayer, the graduate coordinator, Tom Carroll, or the evil Tom Carroll, as we call him, was also antagonistic toward Murray and Murray's students. After I subjected my committee and the others who attended to my torturous 1.5-hour thesis defense, by the way, if you're ever defending your thesis, you want to thin out the crowd, keep the questions at a minimum, go for an hour and a half, especially in an unconditioned room. Murray handed me after the defense, Murray handed me a sarcastic memo that Carroll had circulated to the economics department faculty. It read, on Thursday, April 2nd at 3 p.m., Doug French will defend his thesis in room 518. Since he has not shared his thesis topic with me, you will have to learn that on Thursday. As far as I know, his committee consists of Murray Rothbard, Hans Hoppe, and Terry Ridgway. Nevertheless, all graduate faculty from the department are permitted to attend the presentation, to ask questions, and make recommendations to the candidates committee. Now, the idea that Carroll, as graduate coordinator, didn't know what my topic was or who was on my committee is complete nonsense. In fact, he signed off on my thesis prospectus on October 2nd, 1991, approving my topic. He signed my appointment of examination committee on November 21st, 1991, approving my committee members. See, I'm the efficient banker. I kept all these records. Carroll's memo clearly bothered Murray, but he didn't want me upset, so he didn't show me the memo until after I'd completed the defense. I also remember being quite apprehensive the day of my thesis as the thesis defense approached, and knowing that all the graduate economics faculty were invited, but Murray calmed me down. He said, don't worry, you know more about bubbles than anyone in the room. Murray's mentoring didn't stop when I completed my thesis and graduated. I moved to Reno, but we did stay in touch by mail. I was actually talking to Jeff on this iPod thing we did today. Whatever an iPod is, somebody will have to tell me. But a guy as busy and productive as Murray had time to write letters to me, 2 and 3 pages long, single space, just staying in touch with an ex-student. It was really quite extraordinary, and Murray was very, very generous with his time. But Murray encouraged me to take part of my thesis that dealt with tulip mania, submitted as an article for publication in various mainstream economics journals. He felt I had a good chance for publication, believing that I had made, as he put it, a contribution. However, for whatever reason, none of the 7 or 8 mainstream economics journals shared Murray's view. And actually, he wrote me in a letter in December of '92, "Your experience with the journals reminds me that every time I've been rejected by a scholarly journal, I've been infuriated, not because of the rejection, but because the referees all seem to be a pack of morons and miss the point of the article. Hence, I rarely submit stuff to the journals anymore." But Murray wanted me to continue to try and mentioned 3 other journals to submit to, which I did. But then a year later, after these rejections, Murray wrote me, "That's monstrous about these rejections. I might have told you that I've never received a rejection letter that furthered the alleged purpose of the offering helpful criticisms, and I guess it's still a perfect record. If you haven't tried Economic Inquiry and the Southern Economic Journal, you might try them if the Journal of MCB turns it down. If all else fails, don't forget the Review of Austrian Economics, which will certainly be receptive." I was back in Vegas in December of '94, and I went to see Murray. I hadn't seen him in a few years since I moved to Reno, and went up to his office and actually waited in the hallway, as I had many, many times, for an hour to see him. Thankfully, over the years, they've started putting a chair out there, so you didn't have to sit on the floor. But I waited for an hour. He didn't show up, so I gave up. Actually took the elevator down to leave, but the elevator opened, and there he was. And so we went up to his office. We chatted for a while before he was going to give his last final. And what Murray would do, would give his last final, he'd grade all the papers. Everybody had to write a 10-page paper, if I remember right, and all the exams, which were all essay questions. And then he'd catch the red-eye to New York. And so I was catching him on that last night. But I told Murray about a Liberty Magazine conference that I had attended that fall. It was given by Bill Bradford, I guess the late Bill Bradford, which was entitled "Why Libertarians Love to Hate." And the speech was essentially about Ayn Rand and Murray. And I told Murray about it. He just howled with laughter when I told him about it. And I'd ordered the tape of Bradford's talk, and we were actually going to get together when he got back from the holidays and play the tape, and you know what fun that would have been to do that with Murray. Unfortunately, that's a laugh we were never able to share. He never made it back from New York City. But these gentlemen that I've talked about have had and continue to influence lives even after their deaths, and that is true greatness. In contrast, the mainstream press is gushing over Warren Buffett's $31 billion contribution to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And although these guys are very astute at accumulating wealth, and now they want to bask in the glow of the worldwide praise, they're essentially going to throw their money at solving problems that money's not needed to solve. Gates said he and Buffett are looking for problems that the free market cannot, or will not solve, and Buffett claims the market system has not worked in terms of poor people. But I tend to agree with Doug Casey, who wrote in his recent International Speculator newsletter that he calls Gates and Buffett idiot savants, that they are anti-capitalistic limousine liberals. Buffett is on record as being pro-high property taxes, and along with Bill's dad, and Bill Gates' dad, supports taxing the dead. And the Gates Foundation, by the way, focuses on world health and on improving U.S. libraries and high schools. Ironically, one of the diseases that the foundation focuses on is malaria, but as Lou wrote a couple weeks ago, it's already a cure for malaria, DDT, and the government's banned it. And as far as improving high schools, again, get the government out of the education business and that problem would be solved. Don't need Warren's $31 billion to fix that problem. Gates and Buffett should continue to do what they do best, make money and accumulate capital. The accumulation of capital, no matter who owns it, adds to the demand for everyone's labor and so enriches everyone. If these billionaires want to truly help the poor and sick and insist on donating their vast fortunes, they should support the teaching of Austrian economics. What the world needs now are free markets and unfettered capitalism. Gates and Buffett should use their billions to spread that message. But something tells me they haven't dropped by the Mises Institute to drop off a check. So it's left to us to carry on Murray Rothbard's work and ideas. Ideas that will stop the devolution of society and allow entrepreneurs like Carrier and Yankie to make the world a better place. It is only free markets that can do that, not increasing amounts of government interference, not billionaires spreading their money around perpetuating the same frauds, or rich ex-basketball stars being governor. John Mackey, the CEO and co-founder of Whole Foods, believes, quote, business has a much greater purpose than just profits and is possibly the greatest force for good on the planet today. He said, when executed well, business increases prosperity, ends poverty, improves the quality of life, and promotes the healthy and longevity of the world population at an unprecedented rate. But Mackey also thinks the left has the young audience captured because leftists are idealists who want to change the world. Well, I think Mackey is wrong. I think we have a room full of idealistic young people that want to change the world right here. You have your whole lives in front of you. And with that, you have the chance to change people's lives for the better, either by serving customers as an entrepreneur or following in Murray's footsteps as a scholar and teacher. Austrian economics is the intellectual backbone for the freedom movement. The Mises Institute is the wellhead for its education. You in this room are the best and brightest we have. The future of the freedom movement and Murray Rothbard's legacy is in your hands. I know you're up for the task. Thank you. I can. They're not hard.
What was on Bradford's tape?
What was on Bradford's tape? It was essentially that Murray and Ayn Rand did nothing but create enemies. And that was essentially, instead of building consensus, they wanted to fight with everybody. And that was essentially his take on both Murray and Ayn Rand. I mean, I think that Bill wrote once that Murray was the best guy in the world to have a martini with. But other than that, I don't know if he had all that many good things to say. But that was essentially the thrust of his presentation that day. So.
Liberty has published their list of Bradford's list of the 10 most important libertarian books, and there isn't a single one by Rothbard.
Is that right? Yeah. So. What's that?
Was Murray a Randian?
Well, actually, interestingly enough, I wouldn't call him a Randian, but and I didn't know who Rand was at the time. In fact, as you can tell, I didn't know much of anything. Probably still don't. But Murray is the one who introduced me to Ayn Rand. And since he was, of course, excommunicated from the circle, you would expect that maybe Murray would be somewhat antagonistic about Rand, but he wasn't. He was very complimentary. Oh, you should read Atlas Shrugged. You should read Fountainhead. So when I talked to him about Ayn Rand, he was very complimentary, but I certainly wouldn't call him a Randian. So, Rand picked her economist. She had a choice, Murray and Alan Greenspan. So the choice was obvious. She went the Greenspan route. Yes, sir.
You said you had 2 classes with Murray. The first one you mentioned there were 8 other students or 7 other students.
Yeah.
What about your classmates? How did Murray impact them? Did any of them get the message, or what was the experience of your classmates with Murray?
Yeah, a few of them Fiametta, forgot her last name, James Philbin. It's the only 2 that I can really remember that I think at all have been associated with the Mises Institute. I know in one class we had, I remember we had some MBA students, and they were completely befuddled by A, it was complete lecture, and B, the tests were essay, and they were all used to multiple choice, and so they did nothing but complain. But there were a number of people, like I say, that took it for auditing purposes. Leah Glody, Jeff Barr, a few people that are around town. Hans and Murray have been actually. They produced a lot of lawyers for whatever reason. In Hans's case, it's probably a good idea, but but not many economics instructors. So anyway.
The reason I ask is one of my biggest honors was Murray once asked me to take his place at Brooklyn Polytech when he couldn't teach, and I substituted for him. And I asked the students, what do they think of Murray as a teacher? I mean, at this time, I was just enthralled with him, and he sort of left them cold.
Yeah.
Engineer students, they
Right.
sort of curled before what.
Right.
I mean, it's one of the greatest disgraces that Murray taught in places that had students that didn't appreciate him as much as we do.
Right. I mean, UNLV is known for its gaming studies, I think, and food and beverage, I believe. So yeah, there wasn't a lot of intellectual rigor going on in terms of students coming from other disciplines. So, and there wasn't very many people in class. There were only about 8 to 10 people. So, yeah.
Several students have asked during the week about practical applications of Austrian economics, ways in which knowledge of Austrian economic theory can be useful to practitioners, to entrepreneurs, to people in business. Could you comment at all about how your academic studies with Murray or other parts of the degree program, to what extent they have been useful to you as a professional?
Yeah, it's cost me a lot of money, actually. Yeah, I took Murray and then fell into this hook, line, and sinker. So I immediately thought I'm looking for a bubble around every corner, and so I've been I buy gold, and so I was buying gold at 500 and watched it go down to 250. Instead, I was in Las Vegas, and I should have been taking my money and putting it in real estate, borrowing all I could. But I think that in banking, certainly there is an application in terms of a knowledge of the business cycle that I think that a lot of people believe that bankers are smart. Their average banker is smart, and he's not. And the average business owner that's out there, I think there was a question in the macro panel today about entrepreneurs, why don't they anticipate when things are going to be bad? And that's not the way entrepreneurs are. If money's cheap, and I've literally had real estate developers say this to me, I'm going to borrow money even if it's wrong because the money's so cheap. And they also will build until they go broke. If it doesn't work out, then they'll hit the wall and they'll start all over again. And I've heard the chairman of the National Association of Income Property essentially say that. So I think as a banker you get a better sense for business cycles, and that's especially probably the most handy thing about it. However, I think we tend to be a little early. We see things and probably miss some opportunities, and that's why you can be sure, folks, that I've lent as many dollars as I possibly can on real estate in Las Vegas in the last 9 or 10 years, and to this point it's been successful, but I can't say, what it'll be in the next few years. But yeah, there are some applications. But as far as, and I have received emails about whether it's better to get an MBA or master's in econ, and I don't. That's maybe an open question, but I think that employers, an economics degree sometimes might intimidate them, whereas an MBA I don't think intimidates anybody, and it certainly shouldn't.
Doug, I met a former colleague of Murray's at Trinity University, and she thought the world of Murray. Thought Murray was great and Hans was great. I was wondering if you had any sense as a student of the other faculty there at UNLV and their relationship to Murray.
I think that universally the faculty thought that Murray was a good guy, but that they certainly didn't do him or Hans any favors in terms of trying to help them attract students. All of the publishing that was being done at the east end of the hall, where Professor Hoppe and Murray's office was. None of the other faculty were publishing anything, and I think there was a fair amount of jealousy because of that. But Murray was impossible not to like. I mean, they liked the guy, but they certainly didn't encourage anyone to become an Austrian. So. You guys aren't going to spit on me. Right?
No, thank you very much.
Thanks.